Cartoons were once the wild frontier of imagination. Heroes clashed, villains schemed, and danger unfolded in ways that blurred the line between fantasy and fear. But when violence spilled too far, studios and censors stepped in with heavy scissors. What was too dangerous for young eyes? What secrets were cut away? Tonight, we uncover 20 cartoons that were censored, trimmed, or silenced for being too violent. Tom and Jerry, 1940. It looked innocent enough, a cat chasing a mouse. Yet, behind its slapstick charm, Tom and Jerry was one of the most heavily censored cartoons in history. Created in 1940, it quickly became a cultural icon. But its endless barrage of explosions, frying pans to the face, and dynamite mishaps raised alarms. Parents' groups labeled it a how-to manual in cartoon violence. Episodes were later edited with certain scenes cut entirely. In some countries, entire episodes disappeared because characters wielded knives, guns, or dangerous contraptions. The studio quietly trimmed reruns in the 1970s and 1980s to soften the blows. Literally. Even then, debates raged. Was it harmless slapstick in the tradition of vaudeville, or a dangerous influence on children mimicking what they saw? Ironically, the edits only made fans hunt down the originals more eagerly. The full uncut versions circulated on VHS tapes and, later, online bootlegs. The controversy didn't erase its status, it cemented it. Tom and Jerry's violent ballet remains both beloved and condemned, a symbol of how far cartoons were willing to go before the scissors arrived. Looney Tunes, 1930. Looney Tunes ruled Saturday mornings with zany energy. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Yosemite Sam became American icons. Yet, under the laughter, an arsenal of dynamite, rifles, and TNT barrels exploded with startling regularity. By the 1970s, critics began asking, were children really being fed gunfights disguised as gags? Entire shorts were banned, others were trimmed for television, removing scenes where characters fired pistols at point-blank range or planted sticks of dynamite. Yosemite Sam, once introduced as a trigger-happy gunslinger, was especially targeted. The studio often redubbed or redrew certain sequences to reduce his reliance on six-shooters. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers struggled with the edits. The animators never intended realistic violence. It was parody, slapstick exaggerated to absurdity. Still, the climate of concern forced networks to sanitize classic shorts. By the late 1980s, edited, safe versions of Looney Tunes became the standard on American TV. Yet fans never forgot. The missing frames became urban legends, sparking conversations about censorship and creativity. Looney Tunes endured, but its legacy is a reminder. Laughter often walked a razor's edge with chaos, and when censors blinked, the scissors fell. Popeye the Sailor, 1933. When Popeye flexed his spinach-fueled strength, fists followed. Created in 1933, the sailor's adventures mixed comedy with outright brawls. From slugging Bluto across harbors to tossing foes into the sea, violence was his language. Parents adored his message about healthy eating, but the fights overshadowed the greens. By the 1960s, reruns on television were heavily trimmed. Scenes of bare-knuckle punches, pipe smoke gags, or Bluto's more aggressive antics vanished. In some regions, Popeye's pipe was removed entirely in redrawn frames, leaving children baffled by his sudden spinach obsession with no toot-toot to mark the moment. Animators quietly admitted that toning down Popeye diluted his personality. He was a sailor forged in Depression-era toughness, not a pacifist role model. The censors, however, demanded softer edges. Audiences noticed the difference, and Popeye's popularity dipped during the sanitized years. Later restorations brought back the uncut versions, reigniting his cult status among older fans. The violent edits didn't sink him, but they left a scar, proof that Popeye's fists were powerful enough to shake the boundaries of children's entertainment. Mighty Mouse, 1942. Imagine Superman as a mouse. That was Mighty Mouse. Born in 1942, the tiny caped crusader fought wolves, cats, and assorted villains with explosive force. He tossed enemies through walls, blew up fortresses, and once hurled entire armies aside. Children adored him, but parents saw something darker. Concerns grew over his violent resolutions. Networks chopped out entire sequences where Mighty Mouse vaporized enemies in fiery blasts or reduced villains to rubble. The 1970s television syndication softened his image, trimming explosions and hand-to-hand combat into shorter, safer montages. Behind the scenes, CBS executives debated canceling reruns altogether. Some episodes were deemed so violent they were locked in vaults, unseen for decades. Others resurfaced with awkward jump cuts where destruction had been neatly excised. Fans noticed, and whispers spread about lost Mighty Mouse moments. In time, nostalgia saved him. Later DVD releases restored the uncut action, revealing a hero far more brutal than many remembered. The edits became part of his legend, showing how a cartoon mouse once wielded enough power to scare the scissors out of censors. The Flintstones, 1960. At first glance, the Flintstones looked like harmless suburban satire with a Stone Age twist. Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty lived in bedrock, balancing family life with prehistoric quirks. But hidden beneath the laugh track and stone cars were moments of shocking cartoon violence. Fred regularly exploded in anger, pounding Barney with bowling balls, swinging clubs, or starting neighborhood brawls. By the 1970s, television executives began trimming reruns. Parents' groups complained that the Flintstones normalized spousal yelling, barroom fights, and heavy drinking, all wrapped in a family-friendly veneer. Even more troubling, some episodes showed characters using clubs and fists in ways censors later labeled inappropriate for family syndication. The edits created odd continuity gaps. Punchlines suddenly ended mid-joke, while Fred's angry explosions were softened into awkward fades. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera executives admitted the show was written for adults as much as children when it first aired in prime time. The censors, however, wanted it packaged as safe Saturday morning fare. Today, uncut versions reveal a Flintstones fare edgier than memory suggests, closer to the honeymooners' brawl-filled humor than the squeaky-clean image sold to later generations. The edits proved that even bedrock wasn't immune to censorship's heavy hand. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1969. Few cartoons feel safer than Scooby-Doo. A cowardly dog, 4 teenagers, and a mystery of the week formula. What could be controversial? Yet early episodes shocked censors. Villains often carried axes, firearms, or sharp blades, waving them menacingly at teenagers. Shaggy and Scooby, though comedic, regularly found themselves in perilous slapstick traps that leaned closer to horror than comedy. By the 1970s, reruns removed or trimmed shots of weapon-wielding villains. Networks worried about copycat fear among children imitating dangerous stunts or confronting strangers. In syndication, episodes were softened, often leaving the villain's threats implied instead of shown. Even the famous chase sequences had edits where axes vanished or explosives magically disappeared mid-frame. The edits angered animators who had intended the danger to contrast with Scooby and Shaggy's cowardice. The tension made the comedy work, but parents' complaints grew louder, and CBS quietly mandated changes. Ironically, the sanitized versions sparked rumors that original Scooby-Doo was darker, scarier, and even banned in places. Years later, DVD releases revealed the truth. Scooby-Doo once flirted with genuine menace before censors shaved away the sharp edges. What remains is a mystery itself, how a cartoon about fake monsters became a real target of fear. The Jetsons, 1962. In the sparkling future of the Jetsons, flying cars, robot maids, and space-age gadgets seemed safe enough for family viewing. But even this futuristic comedy couldn't escape edits for violence. George Jetson's temper was legendary. He often slammed fists, yelled at bosses, and even spanked his son in early episodes. Jane Jetson, too, wasn't spared from slapstick collisions with malfunctioning machinery. When reruns hit the air in the 1970s, networks quietly clipped sequences showing physical punishment or gadgets exploding into flames. Parents' groups called out excessive cartoon violence in a futuristic skin. Suddenly, George's fist-waving tirades were softened, and entire punchlines vanished. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera animators protested. To them, the exaggerated slapstick was no different from vaudeville. Yet television standards had shifted. The violence of the space age needed trimming if the show was to air during children's hours. The result was a strangely incomplete Jetsons, a sanitized future that looked cheerful but lacked the bite of its original satire. Fans who later uncovered the uncut versions were surprised by how much chaos had been erased. Even in the future, it seemed, censorship had the final say. Speed Racer, 1967. No cartoon blended speed, danger, and violence like Speed Racer. Imported from Japan in 1967, it introduced American audiences to anime's adrenaline. Racetracks became war zones, cars flipped, exploded, and crashed in fiery wrecks. The Mach 5 wasn't just fast, it was armed with saw blades and gadgetry capable of maiming foes. From the start, U.S. broadcasters slashed away at the original violence. Explosions were shortened, crashes edited to appear less fatal, and any suggestion of death replaced with vague lines like, "They'll be okay." Some episodes had entire sequences rewritten or cut to disguise assassins as rival racers and weapons as tools. The behind-the-scenes battle was intense. Translators worked overtime to Americanize dialogue, smoothing over darker themes. Animators were frustrated. Their carefully choreographed sequences of high-stakes danger were gutted. Still, the show thrived, becoming a cult hit. Decades later, uncut Japanese versions revealed just how violent Speed Racer truly was. Characters did die, sabotage was lethal, and the stakes were life or death. What American kids saw was a diluted version, sanitized for safety. The legacy of Speed Racer lies not only in its speed, but in the edits that stripped its teeth. Thundercats, 1985. When Thundercats debuted in 1985, it promised sword-swinging action, mystical villains, and sci-fi battles. The animation was sleek, the storylines epic, and the violence surprisingly sharp for a children's cartoon. Lion-O and his allies often clashed with blades drawn, firing energy bolts, hurling spears, and engaging in hand-to-hand combat that pushed the limits of Saturday morning TV. Almost immediately, parents' groups raised alarms. The Sword of Omens, though iconic, was used in combat sequences that censors deemed too realistic. Explosive battles against Mumra and his minions were trimmed in syndication, cutting out strikes, slashes, and impacts. The original edits often replaced violent blows with reaction shots, leaving younger viewers confused by jarring jumps. Behind the scenes, rank-and-bass executives faced mounting pressure. They defended the fantasy elements, arguing the show's moral lessons, courage, loyalty, honor, outweighed the violence. But broadcast networks erred on caution, editing heavily for reruns. Years later, uncut versions revealed the raw intensity. Fans discovered Thundercats was far darker, filled with moments of danger erased from childhood memory. Today, it stands as proof that even a cartoon about feline heroes couldn't escape the censorship blade. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, 1983. By the power of Gray Skull, He-Man stood as a titan of 1980s television. The muscular hero wielded his sword in weekly battles against Skeletor, blasting villains with magic and sheer brute force. But behind the merchandising empire, the show was constantly at war with censors. From the outset, producers at Filmation were warned. Tone down the violence. Episodes that showed He-Man directly striking foes with his sword were trimmed, sometimes reanimated, to show him knocking enemies aside with non-lethal moves. Weapons often clashed but rarely made direct contact, creating awkward edits. Even Skeletor's more violent magic attacks were softened with bright flashes and quick cuts. Critics still weren't satisfied. Parent advocacy groups accused the show of promoting aggression, sparking heated debates. Filmation scrambled, inserting moral lessons at the end of each episode. Many public service announcements designed to justify the battles. Behind closed doors, animators admitted it was damage control. The edits didn't kill He-Man's popularity, but they shaped his legend. Generations grew up believing they saw epic battles, only to discover later that many were censored into strangely bloodless duels. In the end, censorship made He-Man stronger, but less sharp. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1987. Few cartoons dominated the late 80s like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Pizza-loving heroes in half-shells, armed with martial arts weapons, battling Shredder's army in neon-colored chaos. But to broadcasters, those weapons were the real problem. In the United Kingdom, censorship was fierce. The very title became Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles because the word ninja was considered too violent. Michelangelo's nunchucks were cut from nearly every episode, leaving him awkwardly edited or suddenly weaponless. In the U.S., certain episodes were trimmed to remove sharper combat sequences, particularly sword strikes from Leonardo or Raphael's sai attacks. Behind the scenes, animators struggled to work around the restrictions. Fight scenes had to be choreographed with more kicks, flips, and comical stunts instead of direct weapon strikes. Fans noticed, and debates grew about whether the Turtles' true martial arts edge had been stolen. Years later, uncut versions showed what was missing: gritty battles with real tension. Ironically, the censorship only added to the mystique. The Turtles became both heroes and victims of the era's paranoia about violence in children's media. Gargoyles, 1994. Disney shocked audiences in 1994 with Gargoyles. Dark, moody, and cinematic, the show featured ancient stone warriors brought to life in modern New York. Unlike most Disney fare, it embraced gothic violence, sword fights, rooftop battles, and villainous plots drenched in menace. Almost instantly, watchdog groups objected. Episodes showing realistic gunplay were censored for reruns, with entire sequences trimmed to avoid characters pointing firearms at others. Sword clashes were softened, and blood, rare but present in the original cuts, was edited out. Behind the curtain, Disney executives battled internally. Some feared the show was too dark for their brand. Animators argued that the gothic tone demanded it. The compromise was heavy editing and syndication. By the late 90s, many fans only knew a watered-down version where the Gargoyles' fiercest clashes had vanished. The edits didn't erase its legacy. In fact, the controversy elevated Gargoyles into cult status. Fans still clamor for uncut versions, remembering it as Disney's boldest, most dangerous cartoon experiment. The censors tried to clip its wings, but Gargoyles endures as proof that darkness has a place in animation. Batman, the animated series, 1992. When Batman, the animated series, premiered in 1992, it shattered expectations. With noir-inspired visuals, brooding atmosphere, and stories bordering on psychological horror, it felt more like cinema than Saturday morning fare. But with that maturity came controversy. Batman fought with fists, grappling hooks, and batarangs in gritty hand-to-hand combat. Villains like Joker and Two-Face carried guns, and their crimes often implied real danger. Several episodes were edited in reruns to tone down the violence, gunfire muted, punches trimmed, or impacts replaced with reaction shots. The infamous Christmas with the Joker episode once showed helicopters exploding mid-air with implied casualties. Later broadcasts softened the destruction. Behind the scenes, producers Bruce Timm and Paul Dini constantly negotiated with censors. They argued the violence was stylized, but standards demanded restraint. Network notes often included "reduce impact" or remove direct hit. Still, the creative team managed to slip in remarkable intensity, often pushing right against the limits. The edits couldn't erase its reputation. Fans remember Batman, the animated series, as the darkest, most mature superhero cartoon of its era. The censorship only fueled its legend, a reminder that sometimes even shadows were too sharp for children's TV. X-Men, the animated series, 1992. Marvel's X-Men burst onto television in 1992 with raw energy. Mutants like Wolverine, Cyclops, and Storm clashed against Magneto, Sentinels, and humanity's fear. But the violence baked into the comics didn't sit easily with network censors. Wolverine, famous for his claws, was particularly targeted. Rarely was he allowed to stab enemies. Instead, his claws slashed doors, walls, or robots, stand-ins for real foes. In several episodes, action scenes were reanimated to avoid, showing lethal strikes. Laser guns replaced bullets, and injuries were quickly brushed aside with vague lines like, "They'll be okay." Behind closed doors, animators admitted frustration. Wolverine without his claws felt neutered, and Magneto's battles lacked the stakes of the comics. Still, the edits were necessary to keep the show alive on Saturday mornings. Parent groups continued to protest, but ratings were too strong to ignore. In the years since, fans have revisited the show with nostalgia. Many never realized just how much was trimmed. Uncut scripts revealed darker intentions, proof that X-Men walked a tightrope between comic book grit and censored Saturday morning safety. The edits left scars, but the series' power endured. Samurai Jack, 2001. When Samurai Jack premiered on Cartoon Network in 2001, it was hailed as art, minimalist storytelling, cinematic action, and a lone warrior battling through time. Yet its beauty was inseparable from its violence. Jack's sword clashed constantly against robots, demons, and assassins. His battles were ballets of destruction. Censors initially allowed the series because enemies were mostly robots. Oil splatters replaced blood, metallic limbs fell instead of flesh. But as the series progressed, some sequences still struck nerves. Episodes where Jack fought more human-looking foes were trimmed, softening fatal blows or cutting lingering shots of aftermath. International versions were edited even further, with several action scenes shortened for broadcast. Behind the curtain, creator Genndy Tartakovsky pushed back. To him, the violence was integral to Jack's journey. His quiet heroism emerged only through struggle. But networks demanded edits to keep the show within children's programming standards. Despite the censorship, Samurai Jack earned critical acclaim and later a cult revival. The edits couldn't erase its artistry, though they did alter the intensity of some episodes. Fans now seek out restored versions, craving the full, unfiltered vision. Even censored, Jack's blade cut through animation history. Dragon Ball Z, 1989. Imported from Japan in 1989, Dragon Ball Z was unlike anything American children had seen. Martial arts, superhuman powers, and galaxy-shaking battles, its intensity was legendary. But U.S. networks immediately cut deep into its content. Violence was everywhere, fists broke bones, energy blasts vaporized enemies, and characters died dramatically. For American broadcasts, much of this was softened. Blood was recolored, wounds erased, and death rewritten as vague disappearances. The infamous fight where Vegeta brutally crushes opponents was shortened, and Goku's battles often had entire minutes missing. Behind the scenes, translators rewrote dialogue to mask violence. Kill became defeat, and die became sent to another dimension. Animators watched as their saga of life-or-death combat was recast into sanitized rivalries. Fans noticed the awkward edits, with jump cuts disrupting fights and emotional stakes. Ironically, the censorship only increased its mystique. Uncut Japanese versions, shared through tapes and later DVDs, spread among fans like forbidden treasures. What American kids thought was intense turned out to be only half the story. Today, Dragon Ball Z stands as one of the most censored and most beloved anime imports in history. Powerpuff Girls, 1998. At first glance, the Powerpuff Girls looked harmless. Three wide-eyed heroines saving Townsville with sugar, spice, and everything nice. But their battles were anything but sweet. Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup pummeled monsters, aliens, and crooks with bone-crunching force. Buildings exploded, villains bled, sometimes visibly, and action sequences rivaled superhero comics. Cartoon Network loved the edge, but censors grew uneasy. Several episodes were trimmed in reruns to reduce the violence. Punches and kicks that landed too hard were shortened, and scenes of villains battered beyond recognition were softened. In one episode, Him's brutal treatment of the girls was heavily edited, leaving awkward jumps in the narrative. Behind the scenes, creator Craig McCracken admitted the tone walked a fine line. The girls were meant to parody violent superheroes, but their superhuman clashes shocked adults expecting safe children's fare. International broadcasters, especially in the UK and Asia, often cut entire fight sequences. Despite edits, the show thrived, its mix of cuteness and chaos unforgettable. The censorship only highlighted its daring, proof that even candy-colored heroes could strike too hard for comfort. Today, the uncut episodes remind fans that sugar and spice sometimes carried a heavy punch. Ren and Stimpy, 1991. Few cartoons rattled censors like the Ren and Stimpy show. Debuting on Nickelodeon in 1991, it was wild, grotesque, and unapologetically violent. Ren, the manic chihuahua, often exploded in fits of rage, slapping, strangling, or beating Stimpy in over-the-top sequences. Audiences laughed, but watchdog groups called it disturbing. Nickelodeon frequently intervened. Episodes aired with entire minutes cut, softening Ren's outbursts into toned-down slapstick. In some cases, violent gags were removed after their first broadcast, disappearing from reruns entirely. Internationally, broadcasters censored even more, nervous about the show's mix of surreal humor and sudden brutality. Behind closed doors, tension brewed. Creator John Kricfalusi clashed with executives, insisting the violence was part of the show's dark comedy. Nickelodeon disagreed, demanding changes. The conflict eventually led to his firing, cementing the show's reputation as too hot for children's TV. Yet the censorship only added to the mystique. Fans whispered about lost Ren and Stimpy episodes, circulating bootleg tapes of the uncut violence. Today, the show is remembered as groundbreaking, bizarre, and deeply controversial, a cartoon that censors could never fully tame. Beavis and Butt-Head, 1993. MTV's Beavis and Butt-Head wasn't a Saturday morning cartoon, it was late-night rebellion. Two dim-witted teens mocked music videos and caused mayhem, but their cartoon violence sparked outrage. They set things on fire, swung chainsaws, and hurled heavy objects with reckless glee. Parents quickly blamed the show for encouraging dangerous behavior. Censorship was swift. MTV banned entire episodes, pulled reruns, and ordered edits. Beavis's infamous chant of "Fire, fire" was removed from syndication after a tragic real-world incident was loosely linked to the show. Scenes of arson, explosives, or dangerous stunts vanished, leaving jumpy edits that dulled the show's chaotic spirit. Behind the scenes, creator Mike Judge was caught in the storm. He defended the show's satire, but admitted some episodes were too extreme. Networks panicked, fearing lawsuits and bad press. The scissors came down hard, turning certain episodes into shadows of their originals. Ironically, censorship only fed the show's legend. Fans scoured tapes for uncut versions, treating them as forbidden treasures. In the end, Beavis and Butt-Head proved that cartoon violence wasn't just a kids' issue, it was cultural dynamite. South Park, 1997. When South Park debuted in 1997, it was chaos unleashed. Crude animation masked razor-sharp satire, and its violence shocked even seasoned viewers. Children cursed, fought, and died. Kenny's endless deaths became a running gag. Explosions, shootings, and graphic fights pushed boundaries well beyond typical cartoons. Networks braced for backlash. Several episodes were banned outright, while reruns were heavily edited. International broadcasters often refused entire storylines. Even in the U.S., some violent scenes were trimmed for syndication, with Comedy Central scrambling to walk the line between satire and scandal. Behind the curtain, creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone relished the controversy. They knew censorship was inevitable, and they often used it as fuel, writing episodes that mocked the very networks trying to silence them. Fans, meanwhile, treated the censored episodes as proof of South Park's cultural danger. Over time, the show became a juggernaut, surviving countless edits and bans. Its violence wasn't accidental. It was commentary, weaponized. South Park remains one of the most censored cartoons in history, and one of the most unbreakable. From Tom and Jerry's slapstick mayhem to South Park's satirical bloodshed, these cartoons prove one truth: animation has always danced on the edge of danger. Censors tried to cut, trim, and silence, but the spirit of rebellion always bled through. Which cartoon shocked you most? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the conversation.